Hello, everyone. Before I hand this over to Kristin, we have a couple of housekeeping items we want to take care of here. So for any of you who missed the initial introduction, welcome to Roadmap to Revenue, how to sell the way your customers want to buy. This session will be presented by Kristin Zhivago, author and revenue coach. My name is Emily Stringer, and I'm a consultant services advisor here at MBO Partners. I've been with the company here for about 4.5 years, and we've been in the business for quite some time. We love helping our independent consultants, and we want to give you a few resources today to get you started on your independent path. So next I want to go through a few of the webinar controls. A few more housekeeping tips here. You can see the webinar controls. Please click the button with the small screen icon to move into full screen mode, and don't hesitate to send questions across throughout the presentation by typing them into the box shown here. We will answer them all at the end of the presentation. I would, however, like to answer the most common question we get right now. Yes, we will be emailing you a recording of this webinar. You should see it in your inbox early next week. A bit about MBO Partners for those of you who don't know. MBO Partners is a full business operating system solution. We offer business management in the cloud, complete corporate infrastructure, instant Fortune 500 supplier credentials, expert support and administration, contract negotiation, liability coverage, and executive style benefits. Our goal is to make it easy for the self-employed professional and their clients to work together. In short, our goal is to make your life easier. Please visit the website for more information. We will be live tweeting today's session with hashtag MBOWeb, so please join in the discussion. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Kristin Zhivago, a revenue coach who helps entrepreneurs increase their revenue by selling what their customers want to buy the way they want to buy it. She speaks worldwide on the subject of revenue generation, blogs at revenuejournal.com, and is the author to Roadmap to Revenue, how to sell the way your customers want to buy. Clients range from startups to Fortune 100 companies. Welcome, Kristin.
Hi, thanks. Glad to be here. All right, so welcome everybody. Nice to have you on board. I have already spoken to some of you. I practice what I preach. I always interview some of the people who are going to be in the audience before I give a talk, and just to understand what your issues are and what you're hoping to get out of the webinar. So it was a very interesting couple of conversations. The first thing I want to just point out here is that the subhead of my book and this webinar is how to sell the way your customers want to buy. And that seems really obvious, like why wouldn't we do that? And the real answer is none of us do. Not naturally anyway. If you don't make an effort to do it, it doesn't happen. So why is that? I mean, I've been focusing on this single issue, having been marketing and selling mostly in the high-tech business, but when the web came out in '94, really started becoming a commercial medium, I branched out into a number of different industries, travel, health, and some of the other, a lot of publishing work. And over the years, let's see, I started writing about the buying process as versus the selling process back in 1991 in my newsletter. I used to send out a newsletter called Marketing Technology. And I think I was one of the first people to identify this idea, or to voice this idea that we really aren't in control of the buying process. It's the buyer who is in control of the buying process. Now that was true in '91, even before the web started coming on, but after the web came on, and really after Google and Amazon, those were the two really big shifts that made it possible for you to search for whatever you wanted, and it turned the web into a worldwide shopping mall. most of the shopping that happens now happens online, either through the research ahead of time before someone talks to a salesperson, or for the whole process, the whole buying process. And we'll talk about that. There are different levels of products based on the amount of scrutiny that the customer applies to the purchase. I'm assuming that quite a few of you are in the intense scrutiny area, in the sense that you're providing services and those services are over a long period of time. But we'll get into that later in the presentation. You'll find out where you are on that scrutiny scale. This is kind of an odd slide because I didn't put any numbers on the bars. And the reason I didn't is because it differs based on the amount of scrutiny that the customer is applying to the purchase. These numbers are a little fuzzy because it varies based on that scrutiny. However, they are based on my experience interviewing thousands of customers for hundreds of my clients. And you know, if you look at this as a scale of 100, I don't know anybody that doesn't shop online first. I suppose there are a few areas where that doesn't happen. Maybe food is one of them. But people definitely seek advice from trusted influencers now, and those are not analysts and the press or people like that as much as it is people they trust who are their working peers. Many of them they have met online somehow or at some event. The people who buy intense scrutiny products and services have always told me that they go to 2 or 3 or 4 people they trust first before they even develop the short list or even go onto Google. They definitely want to avoid salespeople, and this is one of the odd discrepancies in our world right now. As a seller, you feel that having salespeople is a necessity. It's a necessary evil. As a buyer, especially if you're a CEO or an entrepreneur, you do everything in your power to avoid talking to salespeople. Now, there's definitely a disconnect there. So as buyers, we know what's really happening in the mind of the buyer, but as sellers, we think we have to have salespeople. We have to sell a certain way because that's the way people have always done it. What's wrong with that idea is that buyers have shifted drastically. I mean, we're really talking about a massive behavior shift on the part of buyers. The other thing they can do now that they're online and they can interact with other customers who have bought from you is they can find your weaknesses, not only from your current customers who will talk online or tell them in person, but from competitors who are aware of your strengths and weaknesses and use them against you. But the big bottom line here is that the buyers own the buying journey. If you don't sell the way they want to buy, you're not going to sell. What's happening now, as I mentioned, is we're still selling the old ways. We have actually automated harassment, those calls that you get from robots that say, I'm calling to tell you about something, or even almost robots, people who are hired to say, I'm not calling to sell you anything, and then of course they proceed to sell you. It's all very insulting, and they call during dinner, and it really doesn't work. I mean, you start the relationship off on the wrong foot. The other problem is that the content is often irrelevant. And again, as buyers, we know that. We know when we're trying to find a specific answer and we can't find it. As sellers, we are just as guilty of generating that irrelevant content because our copywriters are not talking to customers. I can't tell you how many marketers I have trained across the world, really, to just get on the phone like I did before this webinar and interview customers. So you're not writing to somebody who you don't know, but you're writing to Wanda or Bob or Fred, and you know what they want, and you know who they are, and you know what their specific issues are. And of course, we're still trying to cold call, which is, I actually did that for a client recently just to confirm in my own mind how badly it works and how inappropriate it is and how it starts the relationship off on the wrong foot. I actually did a rent a VP, turn a sales department around, and then once I'd done that, I went into the trenches to see what we could do to improve the selling process. And you know, it's not even a great way to make a living. It's pretty frustrating. So what are some of the reasons that we don't sell the way they want to buy? If we don't do that, we don't establish trust. So they haven't heard of us before they go looking for what they need. We're not there when they search for what they need because, frankly, we use different search phrases than they do. And everybody uses an SEO person, and the SEO person says, oh, just go into Word Tracker and all those other tools, AdWords and so on, and see what people are searching for. But honestly, I find out the best search phrases from customers when I interview them, and I say, if you were looking for this product or service again, what would you type into Google? And those are the phrases that we really want. And they're always different from what the SEO people tell us. And it's just a phone call away, but you can find out. The content that we provide does not engage them. It's sort of, the web is now filled with advice articles about the top 10 ways to do this or the worst 5 ways to do that, or just a lot of generic advice for us. And a lot of it's written by people who maybe have 2 or 3 years of experience, and I know a lot of you, like me, have been in business for decades, and we're pretty much well beyond that. But even the 30-somethings are well beyond what the 20-somethings write. So we have to be really careful about that. And then our people or websites don't answer very specific questions. This is the biggest problem. Even on Amazon, if you go to Amazon and you're buying some physical device, it's shocking to me how often they don't tell you how big it is. I mean, all you really want to know is the size, and they won't tell you. So that's a very specific question. You have a need to have it answered, and they tell you everything but that. So what's really missing from the whole sales process right now in order to sell the way the customers want to buy is relevant content. A buyer who reads relevant content, which is really quite rare if you think about your experience as a buyer, is so relieved. Oh, good. You know what I want to know. You answer my specific questions honestly and helpfully, and then you help me make a good decision. So not only do you give me information about your specific thing and how it's better than the others and what I can get from it, but you also say the reason you want this is because of that, and if you're also considering this, you also need to realize that there's a problem here, and you give them that honest comparison. The sites that do that, eBags is a good example. They give you a way to compare. The more you can do to be reflective of the customer's buying environment, their decision-making environment. Making a buying decision is weighing trade-offs. That's what we're doing. We're weighing the trade-offs. There's no perfect solution. We're trying to find the best possible solution, and this one might be a little more expensive, but it has this thing that I need. We have to know what the trade-offs are that they're wrestling with, and sometimes one of the trade-offs is do nothing. It's easier to do nothing. I'm sure that many of you have run into that if you've sold services. So you need to understand the decision-making process that they're going through in order to be able to help them make that buying decision and provide relevant content. Now, one of the questions people ask me when I start doing my revenue coach work is, where should my content be placed? And the reason they're asking that question is because there are a lot of people out there who are, you know, they're like hammer manufacturers, and they tell you that you've got to have a hammer because every problem is a nail kind of thing. And the truth is, depending on the scrutiny level and where your customers expect to find you, you can actually ignore whole segments of even the hottest media because your customers don't expect to find you there. So a proper vehicle mix for a complex B2B solution would be something like I'm showing on the left in terms of the percentage of your spend and your effort. And on the right are the things that maybe aren't so relevant anymore, or in the case of Facebook, for example, I mean, I've asked so many technical guys, would you ever look for this on Facebook when they're looking for a complex technical product, and they go, no. I hardly even do Facebook. My wife's on there, you know, because of our grandchildren or our nieces and nephews or whatever. and I post things from our kids, but no, I would never go looking for that kind of thing there. So if it doesn't relate to the buying process, then you don't need to be there. And the way you find out is you ask them. I'm going to teach you how to do that. So revenue growth lesson number 1 is you can't sell now without relevant content. Sales are happening online, and a number of you that I talked to said that you have grown your businesses through referrals, and that's all well and good, but that means that you are not exposing yourself and your business and all the things that you provide to a wider audience, which means it's going to be harder and harder to grow. That online world is where the decision making is taking place. And if they never know about you and they don't think of you as a thought leader and they don't think of you when they need you because they've seen something that you wrote or you've done something with content that appealed to them, that explained to them that you knew what you were doing, you're not going to sell. You're just not going to be there when they're looking. So what is relevant content? And I'm just going to have one slide on this, and then we're going to go right into the buying process. I just want to make sure we clearly define what it is. It's always educational. It teaches them something they didn't know. And by the way, when I ask people prior to giving a webinar, what is it that makes a good webinar? Most people, 99.9% of them, say the same thing. I did get a new answer yesterday, so hats off to the person that gave me a new answer. But most people tell me they want at least one fresh idea they can take that they haven't heard before. So they want something new that just hasn't occurred to them before, and they want an idea, if maybe that one or another one, that they can take right back to the office and use that day or that week. But those are the two things they want. And these are people who have never talked to each other, who are in completely different industries, in the case of interviewing other people before other webinars that I've given and speeches. But they all say the same thing. So they want new ideas and they want something they can put to work. So I always make sure that I deliver at least one of those new ideas, and I definitely deliver things that you can take back to work. Your relevant content will prove to them, just because they're reading it and getting something out of it, that you are helpful. And people want to work with helpful people. We're sort of living in a jerk society right now, and I have one business rule. I don't do business with jerks. It's made for a very nice life, and if a CEO hires a jerk, often it starts to ruin the company. It's one of the two things that ruin a company. The other one is a CEO not extending him or herself beyond their comfort zone. Which I know it's a cliche, but there are psychological limitations that we place on ourselves, and those are the two things that kill companies more than any other. One is hiring a jerk who starts moving the company where he wants it to go or she wants to go, and then not getting out of your own comfort zone. So let's see, helpfulness is a big deal, and people want to do business with helpful people. Jerks really don't work well in businesses. Businesses are collaborative environments. So you want to be the most helpful person. And you help them weigh their options. You can honestly say, well, yes, you can go this other way, and this would be good for you if you want this, this, and this. It won't be so good when this happens. So you're not manipulating them with false information or by omission, but you're actually telling them, okay, in our experience, this is what you'll run into. Relevant content will put you on the short list, so you'll make it easy for people to refer other people to you. If you are constantly sending something, doesn't have to be much, could be a couple of paragraphs a week or every 2 weeks, whatever the right rhythm is for your type of business, but you want to be on that short list, and you do that by sending them content on a consistent basis. And it can just be one idea that you've kind of gathered or thought about while you were out there in the field working, and you wanted to communicate that to people. I have an article up right now that just went up today that I'm actually republishing an article I wrote about Steve Jobs, because too many CEOs are starting to tell me that they're reading the Steve Jobs book and they're getting excited because it's sort of giving them a permission to be a jerk. And what they're missing is that Steve Jobs wasn't Steve Jobs because he was a jerk. That was actually a liability for him. His unique contribution to the world was that he understood what the customer wanted, and he kept working on it until he made sure that they got it. And that's something that very few of us have naturally. So that's a thought. That's something that came up through conversations, and I thought, boy, I better put that article up again because people are starting to get the wrong idea. So it's just an idea that occurs to you, and then you write it up, or you have someone write it up, and you get it out to your universe. Then when somebody says, do you know of anybody that does X, Y, and Z, they'll refer you. They'll say, oh yeah, there's this great guy I've been working with in the past, and he has this thing he sends. Let me find it. It's in my email box. And of course, that's where everyone does business now, is in their email box, and they'll then send that on. So your content has to be out there, and it has to be referable. What happens if you have relevant content is you sell people before they ever talk to you. I have not sold my services for years and years, and I've been in business since 1979. What I like to do is take orders. I much prefer taking orders to making cold calls. Just, you know, any normal, sane person would feel that way. Your salespeople would be the same. So what I do is I let my content sell for me, my books, my speeches, my blog articles, my tweets even. And then people look me up, they go to LinkedIn, they figure out who I am, they read a bunch of my articles, and they decide that I'm an honest person who really knows what I'm talking about, and they just make the decision. So when they call me, they have two questions. Do you want to work for us? Actually, three questions. Do you want to work for us? When can you start? And how much would it cost? And those are very specific questions that I can only answer on the phone with them because I have different prices for different sizes of companies and so on. But they're sold. I don't have to sell them. They're pre-sold. That's the best position to be in, and your content, if you do it right, will do that for you. Okay. So now let's talk about the buying processes. And as I mentioned, I've been studying this and perfecting this and tweaking this for years and years now. So here's what I would call a genericized view of the buying process. And I'll get more specific in terms of light, medium, heavy, and intense scrutiny. But this pretty much covers a lot of the products and services that are out there. So they always start with their need, not yours. You need to sell. They don't care. They really don't care. That's your problem. They have a specific need. They realize it. They do a search. They ask around. They start to compare products. They start to compare reputations. What's the experience going to be? The biggest question you should always be answering is what's going to happen to me after I buy. I'd say 85% of marketers do not answer that question. All they care about is getting the customer to the point of purchase, and then they don't really worry about the rest. The customer is very concerned about what's going to happen to him after he buys because he doesn't want to have buyer's remorse. He wants to make the decision, and that's it. I'm done. Great. It worked out, and I get what I need, and I go on with my life. So they're going to compare your reputation, and they can do that now. That's pretty easy to do now. It didn't used to be easy, but it's easy now. And then they have very specific questions. Once they've narrowed it down, the price comes into play, and that's part of the trade-offs, and then they make a purchase. So this is the normal buying process. And by the way, you should be mapping out the buying process for your product or service. That's one of the things that you should take back with you. I show you how to do it in my book, but it's really, I mean, just common sense. Sit down and say, okay, what's the first step? And then who's involved? Maybe there's 2 or 3 people involved. Maybe they each have an agenda, and you need to know what that agenda is. You need to know the things that will satisfy those agendas. So you really need to understand more than anything else about the selling process. The thing you need to understand the best is their buying process, because you have to support it. If you don't, this is what happens. They will drop off So they realize they have a need. They go for a general search. You're not there. We talked about that earlier. Competitor does a better job of understanding the phrases that they're using and the way that they search for it and how to get their attention when they see your listing, your post. So if you don't show up, you never even see them in your web stats. That's the problem with web stats. It shows you who showed up, but if a lot of people are out there shopping and they never reach you, you won't even know what you're missing. If your product doesn't shine up on that comparison, if you don't list all of the things they want to know, or if you don't really have what they want, and by the way, even though I'm mostly working with CEOs on marketing and sales and product management, because that's a lot of what I end up fixing, there are times when the product needs a tweak. And usually it's not super serious unless you've made the decision, for example, to not be a cloud-based software package and suddenly everybody's in the cloud. You need to see those things ahead of time. And you will, by the way, if you're talking to customers all the time. I see things 6 months ahead of the market because I'm always talking to customers, and that's where the trends start, with customers. So they compare your reputation. If the competition has a better reputation, they're going to buy from them. If you don't have answers when they come with their very specific questions, which is a very common problem, they'll buy from a competitor. And by the way, your salespeople, this is really an interesting switch that's happening now. Salespeople are trained to answer general questions. However, with the new buying process, by the time they get to your salesperson, they only have a few questions left because they've done the majority of their research before they get to you. So what really should happen is, I'm not even sure we need salespeople. I'm even starting to think that we need technicians who have a good attitude and can talk to human beings, but they're basically people who really understand the product. I'm talking about selling a really technical product or even a business service. You have to get to somebody who really can talk to the customer at their level and weigh the trade-offs and be at that level of sophistication. A salesperson really messes that up when they try to take the customer back to the beginning of their buying process. They've gone through all this stuff, and all they have is a few more questions. You better be able to answer them. And if you can't, they're going to go to a competitor. And they won't tell you, by the way, while you're selling to them what they're really thinking. So if you have a sales force and you're depending on them for feedback from your customers, you're not going to hear the truth. Because if you think about it yourself, when was the last time you told a salesperson what you were really thinking while you were being sold to? However, after you make a purchase, if somebody calls you and they're knowledgeable and they're not boring survey taker, but they're really someone you can have a conversation with, and they start asking you open-ended questions, how did you feel about the experience? What trends do you see in the market right now? If you were the CEO of this company tomorrow, what would you fix? These are all questions I have in my book because I've tested them and refined them over thousands of interviews. You ask those kinds of questions, and those customers are now open. They want you to succeed because they've invested in you, and they will tell you everything, including how they bought, why they bought, the phrases they used, what they thought of your salespeople, everything. So you can get that data. You just have to ask the questions properly at the right time. There's the price comparison, and it's not just the price itself, but how it's structured. In the sales department turnaround I just did, my clients' salespeople were asking the finance guy every single day, can I do the deal this way? We have this special thing, if I can give him this. And it was taking up a lot of time, and it slowed down the selling process. So I redid the product pricing so it made perfect sense. Anybody could look at it. It was on one page versus a 7-page document. And not a single question after that. And the discounting went down because we were pricing the way the customer wanted to buy. Okay, so by the way, there's no such thing as a vacuum in this stuff. If you're not doing it right, your competitors will get the business. You can't be sort of a bystander. You can't do this halfway. You can't just sort of assume that it's going to be okay. You really have to take an active role in this in order to get your sales up. Now, I'm showing this slide just to show how much of this content stuff happens. And again, I'll show you the different scrutinies in my next slide. But this self-service aspect of doing all the product comparisons and it isn't until they get to the very specific questions that they even raise their hand, that they even let you know what they're looking for or that you're interested. And that's when, number 5, is when they start seeking sales assistance. The more light the scrutiny, the more of these steps they'll go all the way through, from the realization of the need to a purchase, just like a one-click purchase at Amazon, where you just go in, you find it, you compare around, and you go, one click, I'm done. One of the things that has shocked me about Amazon is how few people have picked up on those brilliant things they've done, like the Prime membership and the one-click ordering. I mean, Amazon's miles ahead of us in terms of giving the customer what they want, and people just haven't picked up on it. They aren't learning from it. So now we're getting to the scrutiny thing, and this again is covered in great detail in my book. I have a chapter dedicated to each one of these scrutiny levels and all of the types of questions that people buy and how that purchase is made. So I've tried to be as helpful as I could on that. All of the products and services in the world, if you look at everything from the buyer's perspective, can be split into these 4 categories of buyer scrutiny. Light is the cheap stuff, which is why there's only $1 sign, and you can make the decision in minutes. Medium scrutiny, more questions, still self-service. This is like clothing and things like that. That light scrutiny is chewing gum, or the equivalent of an impulse purchase. Medium scrutiny is like clothing, things like that. Very light sales involvement, maybe at the retail level or chat online. You make the decision in hours or days. And then heavy is where you've got a contract and a salesperson involved. These are houses and cars and expensive software packages on the B2B side. And the buying decision takes weeks or months. And then intense is everything in the heavy, the contract, salesperson, all of that, many buyers, lots of questions, but you also get married. There's an ongoing relationship. And any of you who are service providers fall into that category. The buying process takes months or years. However, if you do a good job of educating your market before they come to you, and again, I'm a revenue coach. I'm actually working with the CEO on his business. This is a very deep, intense relationship. And yet, they only come to me with 3 questions because my content has done all that selling. So I've actually gotten my sales process. You realize I'm closing in an hour. I'm not taking weeks or months. I'm not competing against a bunch of other people. They've decided I'm the one they want. That's the kind of marketing that works, that actually grows your business and keeps the business flowing in, and you don't have to spend weeks or months or years selling somebody because they're pre-sold. Now, given that you now understand, and by the way, I'm assuming that I'll go back to that slide. Everybody I've ever talked to always knows where they are on this scale. Just looking at it, they immediately categorize themselves, which is great because you can stop doing things that aren't working for you. So somebody who's selling an intense scrutiny service, for example, should not be trying to sell it like a light scrutiny product. They know they have to invest in content. They know somebody's not going to, they just can't walk up to somebody and say, hi, my name is Joe, will you marry me? That doesn't work. And the same thing with light scrutiny. If you have a light scrutiny product or service, you shouldn't be doing newsletters on how to chew gum, right? So the vehicles, the content vehicles, going back to that slide where I showed you the vehicles that you should be in, that's part of this whole thing. But you'll find out from your customers how they want to get their content and what kind of content they want. All right, so let's go back to the next slide. So with light scrutiny, the entire buying process happens without sales involvement. It's content only, and that includes your packaging, because light scrutiny products and services are often at the checkout counter. So you pick up the package, you buy it based on the packaging. Medium scrutiny, mostly content selling, but might involve the salesperson just to answer a few questions. Heavy scrutiny is definitely heavy content exposure, definitely involves a salesperson, or in the case as I was mentioning earlier, I'm beginning to think we ought to call them a buying assistant or a buyer's guide or something like that, and just do away with this whole idea of salespeople. It's just not working anymore. And then intense scrutiny, lots of content, and then ongoing content to support the relationship, because don't forget, after they buy you, the competition will still be trying to wrestle them away from you. So your content has to continue selling after you've made the sale. So revenue growth lesson number 2 is the content you create should match their scrutiny level. And you'll have to find out from them what they want to read and where they want to expect to find it. And you don't want to waste effort on any content that doesn't match their scrutiny level. So let's talk about the last section here, which is building the revenue machine. Now this is what I do for a living. Again, for companies of all sizes, just structure it differently depending. First, we do what I call a revenue reality check, where I interview their customers, their managers, and some key employees. And using that, I can figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are. And the good news is they will tell me things that they won't tell anybody else or their manager or whatever. I tell them up front that I'm going to record the conversation and have it transcribed, but then I'm going to split it into sections. So I'm going to have a section that says, here's what everybody said about the trends in their industry or their biggest problem. And there's a chunk of conversation which is taken completely out of context, so it will not be associated with the person who said it. And I do that to allow them to speak freely, but they also it also keeps management from reading it and saying, oh, that's Bob, he always says that, and dismissing what is in fact a comment that's carried through with everyone else on the calls. So I have a report, come back with that, talk about that in a minute. And then there's revenue gap analysis, where we look at the findings and we decide where's the lowest hanging fruit. What should we go after first here that could give us the biggest bang for the buck? And then we optimize, and we continue optimizing. Now, I do try to work myself out of a job because I'm a very busy person with lots of clients, and I'm just happy to have everybody get their problems solved. That's what gets me up in the morning, is solving these problems. So I really do try to fix it and then help my clients set up the permanent solution, where there's a new person. I do some recruiting for my clients. We bring in a new person, train them if necessary, get them going, manage them if necessary. But I try to solve that problem so it goes back under the control of the owner of the business. And we do a lot of work in processes, because I found that that's really where most companies fall down. And by the way, that's the reason Amazon is so successful, because they started out as an infrastructure company, a customer-centric infrastructure company. So he started out selling books, then he could start selling anything using the same infrastructure model. And he branched out into all other kinds of businesses, like the cloud hosting that they do now. So that process thing is actually much more powerful than people assume, and if you spend more time focusing on processes, you actually can grow your business. I find that businesses get stuck at the 2 million mark or the 5 million mark or the 10 million mark, and it's because they can't scale. And they can't scale because they don't have solid processes that are people independent. Okay. So let's take a quick look at each one of them. So the reality check. Now this is something that I basically wrote the Roadmap to Revenue book so that I would, 1, teach about the scrutiny levels in the buying process, and 2, teach you how to conduct these interviews yourself. So chapter 3 of my book, and there's a Kindle version and it's available everywhere, but that chapter gives you every single trick that I have learned about how to get them on the phone, how to interview them, how to get the most out of the interview, how to then use the findings afterwards with your team and make it work. We ask open-ended questions, because if you do a survey where the questions are closed, like a web survey or something, you're just confirming what you already know. You're not learning anything new from them. So you really need to have a conversation, and it's better by phone than it is in person. They'll actually tell you more by phone than they will in person. I've started grading on a scale of 1 to 10 in key revenue areas, and I'll show you that. There's a conversation report which is often 50 to 150 pages, and every executive reads every word, and they're always surprised. They always think they know their customers and they know what they think is important and everything, but they are always wrong about something. And that's not because they're stupid. I never work with stupid people. Those people I work with, they're very smart. But they just live in this myth world created by their own in-company universe, and they miss things. There's whole sections of things they don't understand. Whenever I start working with a company, they give me a list of things they think are important, a list of 1 to 10 things that they think are important to the customer. And when I interview the customers, their list is completely different. They might have a few things in common, but they're in a completely different order. I had a company that sold software for field service companies, anybody who had a technician out in the field, and they sold sort of an operating system for your whole environment. It was really a good product. They were brilliant programmers, and I loved the guy. He was a wonderful person. And I can't even remember what they called the name of the company was Pioneer Interactive, and really didn't tell you what they did. It was kind of a tech name. So I went out and interviewed the customers, and by the way, the thing that Pioneer Interactive was so excited about was that they interfaced beautifully with QuickBooks. Really proud of that. It was very hard to do it right, and it was a beautiful, elegant solution, and so they were very proud of that. So that's what they pushed. Well, it turns out I went out and interviewed their customers, and they said, oh, yeah, you know, everybody has QuickBooks. Maybe not as elegantly, but that didn't matter to them. They sort of assumed it was table stakes. Everybody has it. So they just sort of ignored it. And what actually mattered to them is that when you get that program and you start working on it, if you enter data once, it flows everywhere else it's supposed to do. This is the holy grail of computing that really has not even happened until recently, and people are still struggling with it. I want to enter that customer's name and address on the entry screen, and then when it's time to invoice them, I click on there and I create an invoice, and all that data is pre-populated. So you enter it once. And we ended up with a name that reflected that, and it was Field 1 Systems, I think is where we ended up. So it's like you enter it once, you're out in the field, your field service, it just kind of covered all those bases, and they've taken off like a rocket. I mean, they've just been a hockey stick growth situation. So it's a big deal to figure this out and get this right. It's really a big lever when you find it and push it. And every single business has this disparity between what we think and what our customers think. We also do market research competition because don't forget that your customer is out there working in that environment. So you have to know what they're up against and what they're seeing. And then, of course, we present it to the management team, and we have this big dialogue and debate about what we're going to do, and we start planning things out. So this is the revenue gap analysis, and again, I've talked about a lot of this already. Management reads every word. The customer's list is different. And I also mentioned earlier that the #1 inhibitor to revenue growth is management habits, and the second one is if they introduce a jerk into a cooperative environment. So quantifying the data is something I started doing more recently, and what I'm using is this revenue gap analysis, which is something I just came up with recently. And what we do is we ask people at the end of the interviews, we say on a scale of 1 to 10, just give me a quick, it's the only sort of boring part of the interview, but people don't mind. And these subjects at the bottom, the product, pricing, people, processes, they may differ based on the type of company it is. We might only have 5 down here. But these are sort of the general areas. And you just ask them to grade on a 1 to 10. And it's interesting because the numbers that the employees come up with will be different from what the management comes up with, and will be different from what the customers come up with. But you can still take a pretty good average. And then these yellow bars represent those vacuums where you've got a serious problem, where you're losing sales because of this. And they're just vacuums into which competitors are sliding and taking business away from you. So this helps us get to the low-hanging fruit. And the last bit here is how we do that. But I'm going to take a quick commercial break here and just show you that even the biggest companies get this wrong. So this is a screen from Verizon. If you go to Verizon.com, this is what you see. And it's basically organized from a company perspective. Their personas or their divisions. They have a wireless division, a residential division, and a business division. The problem is, what if I'm a wireless customer doing business out of my home? I fall into all three of these categories. What do I click on? There's no alternative. There's nothing for me to click on. There's a little bit of help down at the bottom. Maybe I can make that work in that little bit of gray type. So this was in 2012. And by the way, I was a Verizon customer, and I went there and I'm like, well, if I want to sign in and pay my bill, what do I do? There's no way for me to do what I want to do with the Verizon website. So I went back there recently to see what they've done with it. And what they've done with it is they have better pictures or more up-to-date pictures or whatever. I'm sure somebody got $1 million for this redesign. And they have this rotating billboard at the bottom, which is something that website people love and readers hate. And we've lost our little gray sitemap kind of stuff. So now it's worse than it was. We still have them trying to fit me into their categories. And in this case, I fit into all three. So where do I go? And by the way, I'm also resentful of the fact that they probably are going to charge me more if I'm a business. So this kind of brings up a reputation thing right there just by splitting me into those categories. And they're not giving me any other way to go. There's nothing here to take me in. I have no idea. I'm going to have to hunt around and not get what I need. So don't feel bad. Even the most sophisticated companies don't get this right. So the real big idea for you is that your current customers will teach you how to sell to new customers if you ask them correctly. They will tell you, and you will not be guessing. You will not be one of those companies that throws all that spaghetti against the wall, really dollar bills, and tries to make it stick. You don't have time for that. The market moves too fast. You really need to know what to do, and your current customers will tell you. And by the way, notice that Verizon, if they had asked us, would learn a lot from us. If their web designer had said, you know, what do you want to do? And I would say, well, I want to come there and pay my bill. I want to log in. Or I want new services, but I don't want to do it based on how your divisions are set up. I don't care how your company's organized. But I have certain needs, and here are my 5 needs. So that would have been a completely better way of redesigning that site. So we're now down to the last official slide. This talks a little bit about the types of services that we provide once we know once we've done the revenue gap analysis and so on. So we develop a plan with the management and the other people in the company. We solve the quickest and easiest problems right away, and we start a process for solving the more difficult ones. We always assign owners. Plans don't work without owners. Projects don't work without owners. They need teams, timelines, objectives, and budgets, and then we keep that up. We have to get total buy-in because we don't want to have the whole project stalled halfway through because somebody wasn't consulted or somebody wants to throw a fit. You know, it's not their agenda. You have to get all of that ironed out. You don't have time for that. And you want to learn how to keep the customer's wishes at the forefront. Every single CEO I have worked with tells me afterwards that this was a moment, this was a mind-blowing moment for them when they read those comments and got into the heads of those 5 or 10 customers. And by the way, it only takes 5 or 10 customers before you have a trend. That's the beauty of this method. You don't have to interview hundreds of people. They all say the same thing. By the 5th or 7th call, you know what the patterns are within each given group. And then the other thing about all of this is revenue comes for customers. If you give them what they want, oops, there's a typo there. Sorry about that. Revenue will go up. That's the way it works. So that's the whole big thing and the new ideas and the stuff you can take home with you. And now we're into questions.
Thank you, Kristin. That was wonderful. Now we'll dive into a few of our audience questions. So first and foremost, yes, we will send you a copy of the slides and a recording to all the registrants from this webinar. So beyond that, let's take a couple of additional questions that came up during the course of the presentation. So first, Kristin, how can we be sure that our customers are ready to buy?
How can you be sure their customers are ready to buy? Well, I don't know. That's kind of an odd question because they don't hide it from you. They either have questions or they don't. And I'm trying to wonder maybe the person can type a little bit more into the question box about what they mean. Do they mean in terms of us serving up content and where they are in the buying process? Because
Yes.
that is okay. So if you've mapped out the customer's buying process, you will know what the questions are that they ask during that buying process, and that's one of the questions you ask your customers when you're interviewing them. And you say, what were the questions you had? And obviously, since they bought from you, now you're trying to reverse engineer a successful sale and recreate them in quantity. So what you're saying is, what were the questions you asked? What order did you ask them? Why did you have that concern? And then what was it that we said that satisfied you? And they'll tell you. Now, knowing all of that, you'll start to be able to know what kind of questions they have at the very beginning. And you might want to weigh a lot of your content towards those types of questions. Maybe 50% of your content is towards that end of it. And then as you realize what they ask as they go further in the buying process, you can do the other 50% of your questions on the later stage questions.
Great, thank you, Kristin. At this time, we're going to take a question from Peggy. How can we approach a previous customer and ask if they need help with anything or let them know about new services?
Well, previous customers, if you've been treating them correctly and nicely, they don't mind hearing from you as long as you don't overdo it. You know, there's a rhythm, and you'll pretty much know the rhythm, or you just ask them how often would you like to hear from us. And you can also ask them, do you mind if I put you on lists to tell you new things that we're coming out with? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes, as long as you don't abuse the privilege and you have the normal canned spam law stuff at the bottom where they can unsubscribe anytime and you have your full contact information. So you can definitely, I mean, that's not the better companies that really understand sort of automated good marketing like HubSpot and people like that. They're very good at that sort of thing, and they do give you and tell you. Sometimes they'll give you an article and then one little sidebar that tells you about something new. But even the new announcements customers don't mind hearing about, because don't forget, they bought you to solve a problem, and if you solved another similar problem, they're going to want to know about it.
Great, thanks, Kristin. That's great advice. Now let's take a question from Craig. How do you feel about using LinkedIn to implement trickle marketing as a method to post relevant content to the customer contacts in your network? This would be targeting repeat customers.
Yeah, that's fine. LinkedIn is turning into a very useful tool for all of us. I mean, it's become the world's resume bank and the place to find out about professionals. It really did fulfill its promise in that way. And a lot of people are going there now to read. I've been asking that question, you know, where do you go to read? And a lot of the business managers are now getting a lot of their news and content from their LinkedIn feeds and discussion groups. So that's definitely a good place to go. Now, you can participate in discussion groups, but you have to follow the etiquette. You can't just pitch. You can't be that guy, as Chris Brogan calls him, you know, the one that everybody goes, oh, here he is again, and he's just pitching himself. That's very irritating. So you're selling without selling. You're educating.
Great, thank you, Kristin. We're going to take one last question. It's been a recurring theme amongst our users. What if I meet with resistance with my pricing strategy?
Then you need to change it. You need to find out what would work for them. It's very seldom. I would say it's 5% of the time it's the actual price. It's a question of understanding what their trade-offs are and what they're willing to pay for. You might not even be presenting your product or your service properly, in a way that makes them want to pay that much for it.
Great.
Value
Thank you.
is a relative thing.
Thank you, Kristin. That's great advice, and we completely agree with that. So at this time, we're going to launch a quick poll. If you'd like to learn more about MBO or Kristin, please select one or both of these options. We'll keep the poll up for about a minute.
Should I be giving you back the screen?
Not at this time, no.
Okay.
So at this time, would you like to learn more information from MBO or Kristin Zhivago? Please select all that apply. All right, so thank you everyone for watching. Here's some information on Kristin if you would like to contact her or learn more about her book. And to keep going here to our very last slide for some additional information on MBO Partners. Please feel free to email us at info@mbopartners.com. Visit us on the web at www.mbopartners.com and follow us on Twitter at MBO Partners. Please feel free to reach out, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.